Hi, and welcome to my channel. Or if you're a returning subscriber, hi again! It's so nice to see you back here for another video. My name's Tess Lark, and today I'm going to show you how you can make some glow-in-the-dark rings using epoxy resin and some glow-in-the-dark mica powder. I recently saw a YouTube short of a girl who was trying out some glow-in-the-dark rings, and I thought to myself, what a brilliant idea. So I thought I would throw on my camera and experiment with some glow-in-the-dark pigment from Let's Resin. As always, I will have all the materials that I use for this project linked in the description below. I'll also try to find that YouTube short and link that as well so you guys can see for yourselves. They're really cool. I think these turned out really cool too. But anyway, let's hop into today's project. I started out this project by mixing up 20 milliliters of resin. You're really not going to need a lot of resin for this project because the molds are so small. So I mixed 10 milliliters of resin with 10 milliliters of hardener. Then I let that sit for a few minutes. Next, I'm going to go ahead and hit it with my heat gun before I add my mica powder. The mica powder that I'm using today is by Let's Resin. They've got this really great set of glow-in-the-dark pigments. And for this project, I'll be using the magenta and the green. So I'm just going to separate out that resin pretty much equally into 2 cups so I can mix in my different pigments. Starting with my pink, I'm going to sprinkle some of that in, and I'm trying to keep in mind that I don't want to go over a 90% resin to 10% pigment ratio because I want to make sure that these pieces cure correctly. And then using my popsicle stick, I'm going to incorporate that pigment really thoroughly throughout the resin. Especially when you're using mica powder, you want to make sure that you don't have any clumps of pigment. And you can also test to see how pigmented your resin is by checking to see how it looks on the end of your popsicle stick. And you can always add a little bit more pigment. And I think that this is a good time to remind you that if you are enjoying this video so far, please don't forget to give it a like. It not only helps out my channel a whole lot, it also lets me know that I'm making content that you guys want to see from me. So just moving right along, and I'm going to mix up my green, keeping that 90 to 10% ratio in mind, and making sure that the green is really thoroughly incorporated. I also find that using mica powder in resin tends to leave some air bubbles, so I do like to let my resin sit to allow some air to come up to the top, and then I'll hit them with my heat gun to pop any bubbles that may be forming before moving on to the next step. And next, I'm going to really carefully start pouring some of that resin into my molds. And the opening on these molds are so small that you'll see that it takes quite a bit of time for the resin to really seep into it. So I've got a pretty good pinch on my cup, but also if you have like a pipette, I would recommend using that. If I make these rings again in different colors, which I am interested in doing, I'll definitely be using some pipettes. So I'll make sure to link some of those in the description as well. But I want these rings to be roughly half pink and half green. So now that I've got a good amount of my pink in there, I'm just adding some more green. Again, just working really slowly and trying not to overfill my molds because I can always add a little bit of resin later after the resin has settled a bit more. So for the second mold, I'm just starting with the top here because it is the most open point in this mold, and I also want the top of it to be pink. So again, just starting with my pink and then following it up with my green, working slowly and letting that resin really sink into the mold. Now that I have the molds mostly full, I'm going to really carefully use my popsicle stick just to push the resin in a couple places where I can see a little bit of air pockets. Next, I'll add just a touch more resin where I see that it's a little bit needed. Then I'll hit these with my heat gun again to pop any bubbles before covering them up and letting them cure completely. Okay, so I went ahead and I let these rings set up overnight, and let's go ahead and pop them out of their molds and see how they turned out. There was a little bit of spillage, but it's really easy just to pop that off from the silicone. Although I do see some places on the top where I went over a little bit, so I'm probably gonna have to sand these pieces down. Here's our first ring, and I'm absolutely loving the colors, but there's definitely some little sharper points on here that I'm gonna go ahead and sand, kind of break off some of the bigger parts. And now let's pop out the second one. And same thing, there's a little bit of spillover on the edge here. Just gonna use my finger to poke in the middle, pop that right out, and then we'll get the ring itself out. And this one ended up being a lot cleaner, but there are still a couple little areas that I'll need to sand down. So I'm going to use my Wen rotary tool to sand down my pieces. And whenever you are sanding resin, you definitely want to make sure that you're wearing eye protection and some sort of mask or respirator mask, because you definitely don't want to inhale any of those little resin particles that you're going to create when you're sanding, and you also want to keep it out of your eyes. So as you can see here, I've just got a really small pointed drill bit attachment on because these pieces are so small that I don't want to scuff them up, so I just want to sand the places that need to be sanded. And now that I've got my goggles and my mask on, I'm just going to really carefully hold the piece in one hand and use my other hand to hold my drill and sand these pieces down. And I really love jewelry fabrication. I actually do have an entire jewelry making playlist right here on YouTube, so I'll make sure to link that down in my description as well, and make sure to check that out when you're done with this video. And don't forget to subscribe because I do post weekly. And then moving right along to my second ring, you can see that there's just a couple places here where there's a little bit of resin that spilled over the sides of the mold. So again, I'm just going to use that same attachment and carefully sand down this piece. And I'd love to hear from you guys if you sand resin or other projects, what you like to use to sand down your resin pieces. I find that using my rotary tool works really well, but I guess that just some sandpaper could work as well if you don't want to make the investment and buy an entire rotary tool. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Now that I have my pieces sanded down, let's go ahead and see if they glow. And look at these, you guys. The colors are so pretty and there's such a good glow to them. So these pigments work similarly to those stars that maybe some of you had as kids. And let me know in the comments below if you did have those stars as kids that you would press up against your walls or your ceilings and they would glow at night. But essentially you need to charge them up in the light. So I just held these in front of my ring light for maybe 60 or so seconds and then took them into the dark, and look at them. They're so pretty. Let me know what you think of these in the comments below. And also let me know in the comments down below what color or color combination you'd like to see me making these next time. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me, especially if you made it all the way to the end of this video. And if you did make it all the way to the end of this video, leave me some sort of pink or green emoji down in the comments below so that I know that you watched it until the end. I really hope that this video inspires you to make something of your own today. And don't forget to subscribe because I do post weekly resin art tutorials. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!